Yeah, I know, not great, right? Well, the crash happened about a month ago now, so today I want to give you guys an update on Sparky's health. So if you haven't seen that video on the crash and the drying out and the whole resurrection, I'll put a link up here so you can go check it out. It's got a lot more background information in detail. If you have seen it, that's great. Let's get right to the update. So what happened? Well, basically the Spark hit a low battery threshold. It triggered a return to home. I failed to stop it and it hit the underside of a tree. My Spark hovering in place for minutes at a time while I'm shooting YouTube videos is pretty standard stuff. The day of the crash, I had just received a 30% battery remaining warning when I asked my wife to come over and shoot some B-roll for me. She was having a bit of trouble with the camera, so I went to help her, and it seemed just like, 2 minutes had passed, and suddenly my Spark decided that it has to go home right now. I got back to the remote controller in time, but instead of just immediately pressing the pause button and stopping the return to home, I picked it up. And that was my fatal mistake. I should have just left the remote in place, hit the pause button, that stops the return to home. That's the end of the story. The Spark just hovers there and I can bring it back manually. Now, because I failed to stop the return to home, my Spark rose up, hit the tree, and crashed. And if you guys have been following this channel for a while, you'll know that's not my first brush with a tree. And normally when that happens, there's contact, Spark goes down, and that's the end of the story. But in this case, the Spark went down and just shot off horizontally. I've never had that happen before, and it really surprised me. Under that bridge, there's nothing good. It's basically rocks and water, and I don't want my Spark to come in contact with either of those things. So when I went to go retrieve it, I fully expected to find my Spark in pieces, in the water, just totally dead. Now, to my surprise though, I found the Spark fully intact. It was kind of laying belly up, the battery was off, gimbal was pointed up, and the bottom third of it was sitting in water. And after a quick inspection, yeah, it was okay. Really no bad damage. You found it?
Yes.
The battery itself, which popped off, and in retrospect, that probably saved the Spark from further damage. The battery was just sitting in water with the contact ends down, and that took us about 10 minutes to find, and of course, my good luck charm, Jen, she found it. Once I had the Spark out of the water, the first thing I did was remove all the propellers. I took out the memory card, and then I started blowing off or shaking off the excess water. When I'm shaking it, I really be careful to pinch the gimbal in between my fingers, so when I give it a shake, I'm not subjecting the gimbal to any stress. Same goes for the battery, just shake off the excess water. So this wasn't my first experience with wet electronics, and every time it's happened, I've followed the same procedure. I get it out of the water as quickly as possible, I shake off the excess, and then I try to get it into some kind of absorbent material like rice. Now, in the case of my Spark here, the battery had popped off, and if it hadn't have, I would have removed the battery, but nothing else. Like, I typically don't touch the power buttons. I don't try to turn it on or turn it off. I leave it as is. There are a few comments on the original video suggesting that silica gel packs were a better option than rice. I certainly don't disagree with that. That definitely would be a cleaner option, but the rice is just more readily available. I've used it in the past and it's worked well for me, so I just stuck with that.
You could put it in, I just want to protect these things, but you could put them in the silicone. I have one of the big ones, right?
I think it'll be okay. The rice is going to do what it's going to do. I covered the Spark and battery with rice, and I sealed it up in a bag, and I left it undisturbed for 48 hours. Now, as much as possible, I left it in the heat. It was a travel day for us, so when we were in the car, I put it on the dashboard in the sun, and when we got to our destination, I took it out and I put it on the hood of the car. Now, maybe I've just been lucky, but this process has worked for me no less than 3 times, so I'm sticking with it. So how is Sparky doing? Well, since the crash, I've taken it on no less than 38 flights, and knock on wood, it seems to be working just fine. When I first took the Spark out of the rice and powered it up, it sounded kind of different, and I just attributed that to little bits of rice kind of getting in there and gumming up the works. I gave it a proper cleaning and it sounded just fine. As far as physical damage, one of the props was slightly bent. I tried to bend it back, it didn't go, and really I don't think that's a good idea, so I just replaced it. All the other propellers were just fine. The camera and the gimbal are working perfectly. There is one small scratch on the camera, but it's far enough away from the actual lens that it's not impacting the image quality. There's a little scuff on one of the motors. Oddly enough, it wasn't the same motor that had the bent prop. Regardless though, it's superficial and it doesn't seem to be impacting the Spark during flight. The battery I was using when the Spark crashed has a slight warp in one corner. I've charged it and used it no less than 6 times and it seems okay, but it does make me a bit nervous. So if there's any weirdness with it, I'm just gonna replace it. Overall though, the Spark is doing really, really well, and yeah, I feel very lucky that it's still flying. Well, that's it for this one, guys. And if there's one thing I want you to remember from this video, it's the pause button on the remote controller. It's a handy button that can get you out of sticky situations like an unwanted return to home. So don't forget about it and don't make the same mistake I did. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.